Hey everyone, I'm Steven Chiza.
And I'm Jake Adari.
And before we start episode 2, we just wanted to let everyone know, to all of our loyal listeners for episode 2, that we have a Kickstarter right now, and you'll find a link down in the description. This Kickstarter is used to help improve our audio quality and also cover some of our other costs around managing and running this podcast. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our first contributor. Jake, can you?
Yep. So for our first shout out, we'd like to say a big thank you to Steven Chiza.
Huh. Well, I don't think I can deny this. That was me. I did donate money to our Kickstarter, but it was just money in the tip jar, so other people will be motivated to also help out on the podcast.
All right. Well, if there are any other people out there who are also named Steven Chiza, or any people who have the philanthropist spirit of Steven Chiza, and you're listening to this before January 5th, 2020, please feel free to donate to our Kickstarter campaign.
Thanks so much, and on to episode 2. Hi, I'm Steven.
And I'm Jake.
Welcome to Tales from the SaaS Graveyard, where we talk to employees at tech companies that are in the middle of the bell curve. Not going out of business, but definitely not hitting the big time. The SaaS Graveyard is a purgatory populated by companies that have made it to annual revenues in the $25 to $50 million range, but can't get to the next level, which is pretty impressive outside of Silicon Valley, but frowned upon here.
We interview folks in various roles about their experiences working at companies like this. We're looking to see what common themes emerge across industries and roles. Today we'll be talking with my friend Colin, who's a web designer. For 4 years, he worked at a gaming company during a very transformative time, starting just a few months after the launch of the first iPhone. Now, Steven, you're probably not old enough to remember there was a time we didn't spend every waking moment of our day looking at our mobile devices.
I kind of remember that time period, and I think the first time I really recognized smartphones was when I first went to college, and all the cool kids had BlackBerries. Jake, did you have a BlackBerry?
I was never cool enough to have a BlackBerry. Pre-iPhone, I had a flip phone. It did have a camera. It had a couple games. And I was like, why would they ever put this horrible camera, these horrible games on it? People want a phone to talk to people. They're not going to spend their time looking at the screen.
You know, you sound a lot like my dad when he first bought me my first flip phone, which was like a Razor knockoff. He would buy minutes for me to call and have him pick me up from school. But like text messaging, no way. He wasn't going to pay money for that. Why would anyone want to text over some inferior keyboard that wasn't a computer keyboard? And so all my friends would be able to text me, but I couldn't text them back until like I went home and logged back into AOL Instant Messenger from my big bulky desktop machine to talk to them. But I'm a much happier cell phone user now with my iPhone 6S Plus, still chugging along. And, I love my iPad. It's just nice having control over my technology and what I'm buying and purchasing, opposed to having Dad do that for me.
Well, my dad still buys my tech, but he does buy me Apple products now, so it's all good. And it's good you mentioned the iPad as well, because that was launched while Colin was at this gaming company as well, and it really made a big change in how they develop games, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about that. And with that, Colin, thanks for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Colin, the first question we always ask people to answer is, can you describe the company you were at, the SaaS Graveyard company, as the Uber of X?
I mean, so when I was there, it was over 10 years ago, and it was, it was just when smartphones were starting to get started. So it was a different era, really, in tech. Like it was before I even think that language of the Uber of whatever, or it was at sort of the golden age of PC downloading. So we were trying to kind of be, I guess, the on demand, the Amazon of PC games, maybe. I don't know if that's probably overselling it, but it was casual games, and it was overwhelmingly games that you would download, play on your PC. You'd pay $20 for them. It was just, it was a model. Steam would be the closest thing to it now.
Gotcha.
So we were, maybe the Steam of casual games, and by casual games that had a very particular, connotation.
The Steam of the aughts.
Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. It's not an exact analogy, but it's not far off.
Gotcha. So what were you doing beforehand? How did you end up at this company?
I had been contracting and freelancing as a web developer and designer, doing a little bit of both for 7 years before that, since 2000 leading up to that. And I had worked in a startup before in New York for about 3 years until they ran out of money. And that was fun. I enjoyed it. Came back to California and was just really determined to kind of try and just do my own thing for a while. And I got married in 2007. And one of the reasons for going back to full-time job was the predictability of knowing exactly how much is going to be ending up in my bank account every 2 weeks, as opposed to the freelance contractor kind of roller coaster. So yeah, so I started. So we got married in summer of 2007. Came back from our honeymoon. I started looking seriously. The company I ended up at, they were really the first place I interviewed with seriously. I went in and they just seemed like nice people. It was in a nice office, just a couple blocks from where we are recording at this very moment. Good neighborhood. And they seemed to like me and they offered me the job. So I ended up there.
Gotcha. And what was your title for that job?
When I started there, I was a senior designer. So I forget if it was senior designer, senior graphic designer, but basically I was on the marketing team. That was marketing team / the site team. So we were a games company / publisher. We published more games than we actually developed ourselves. And I was not on the game sort of half of the company in very rough division. I was in the marketing site half of the company. So yeah, I was basically there. So I was basically the senior site designer. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so how big was the company at this time? Number of people, size of revenue, any funding?
I can tell you, I know I was employee number 85. I remember that very clearly. And one of the co-founders, I remember he said at one point he was bummed when we went over 100 because he liked telling new hires that they were more than 1% of part of the company. He really had that tickled him. So yeah, I was employee number 85. I think most of the employees who had started with them were still there. I mean, obviously, I don't think there were still a full 85 there, but they were close to it. We were too big for the office that we were in when I started. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I remember even in the interview was, don't worry, we're moving out of this cramped office that has the real kind of traditional cubicle style setup into a nice shiny new place. And I was looking forward to that when I started. In terms of revenue, we were not profitable. I mean, I think like probably most of the people that you will talk to on this show, but we were doing okay. At least we would have the all hands and, we were doing okay. We were on, I don't remember the exact numbers. We were on at least the second, if not the third round of funding. And, I know that it depends on how much you get in each round. In retrospect, looking back, having been on the third round of funding, we probably should have been further ahead than where we were. But we were moving into a new office. They had lots of snacks and drinks. They had a ping pong table. It seemed like a good place to go.
Gotcha. And how did you first hear about this company?
I think it was, again, this was 2007 when I was looking. It was probably one of the big job sites, if not even Craigslist. I think back then you could still decently find good, downtown San Francisco tech jobs on Craigslist. So it was one of those. It was either like Monster or Craigslist, something like that. And I recognized they had some legitimate bona fide hits. They had a very identifiable, main character for one of their games, and I recognized the character in the listing for the company. So I was like, okay, all right, they seem legit. They were legit.
Yeah. So what were your first impressions when you first got there? Like, what made you excited about the opportunity?
I just, after being independent contractor for 7 years before that and having been in a startup space before, I liked the startup vibe. It was fun, it's if the place feels like they're at least on the right trajectory, it was a good environment. It was a lot of there was a lot of work, but it wasn't crazy hours. It wasn't crunch time. We weren't working at a major game studio, like a console game studio or anything like that. It was a more relaxed atmosphere. I was excited basically just to have a cool place to work, pretty much. Yeah, I felt a little bit like an outsider in that I didn't come from the games world, and a lot of my coworkers did. A lot of my colleagues there from all stripes had worked at game companies before, and I hadn't, so I felt maybe a little bit of an outsider.
Even the people who were working on the site were games people?
My manager was, and one or two of the other designers. We had a small team. It was myself and then two, maybe three other designers. But yeah, I mean, I probably half the team had worked in games in some capacity before. So I kind of felt like I just sort of needed to get up to speed a little bit, I guess. But yeah, I can't. I guess all of that to say, I can't say that it was like my dream job to go work for a games company. Whereas for a lot of people, that really was. It really was a good place to get a job at, especially if you wanted to go on to one of the more household name kind of game studios. Yeah.
Gotcha. Was there anything you wish you knew before you started?
I think I wish I had really maybe better known the game space at that point, because like in 2007, 2008, like looking back now, it was really clear that it was right in the middle, maybe toward the beginning, but certainly it had started of, I don't know, a race to the bottom, I guess, in terms of games, just in terms of quality and quantity. Like it was getting to the point that casual games were doing fine, and they did great, and we had a lot of really strong fans, but there was something about the nature of the games that was really easy to replicate, and it was really easy to generate them cheaply and quickly, and they would sell just almost as good as the really high-quality ones that cost a lot more to generate. So we had a lot of competitors, including what ended up being our major competitor, sort of over the following 3 years, who had, I think, more funding than we did, and certainly were willing to put out a lot more games that were generated a lot quicker than ours and sell them for a lot less, And I think I wish I had maybe recognized what that meant for our company.
Gotcha.
Because we weren't able to really
compete with it.
We weren't able to compete with it on a fast time scale anyway. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you have your first day. What's the next 30 days look like at this company?
The first day I remember was the first day I didn't get much work done. I was one of the first. I feel like a diva saying it, and even at the time, I was one of the first like Mac people on the design team. All the other people on the design team used PCs even at that point, which surprised me even in 2007. So like none of the licenses for my software worked. So I spent most of the first day sitting around waiting for my machine to get set up, and I felt bad about that. But otherwise, aside from that, they kind of just threw me in right away. The first 30 days was a lot of projects. I started, as I say, in January, and if you work in the games industry, especially in San Francisco, GDC, the Game Developers Conference, is a big milestone, and that's in March. So we were like right in the thick of getting all of our PR and marketing stuff and our invites for our parties done. I think the very first thing I worked on was a invite, a print piece, even though I was part of the site team. It was a print invite for our GDC party that year. So it was fun. I like working on print stuff. It had been a while. It was good. It was very busy. It was a fast pace. And when I was sort of hired to really lead the redesign of their site, like their site had been good enough to kind of get them where they were at that point. And now that they were ready to really kind of, relative to that point, move to the next level, like I was sort of brought on to kind of lead the site redesign. And so we were busy, and it was fun. We had a lot of autonomy, and I had a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do, and it was good. It was a good 30 days. It was busy, but it was fun.
Were there any surprises in those first 30 days?
I don't think there were. There really weren't. It really went very smoothly. I liked my coworkers and my colleagues there. A lot of them are still some of my closer friends. The people who I ended up going on to do my own podcast with, I met there. So I can't say there were any bad surprises there. No, it was pretty good. It was pretty good first 30 days. And especially, knowing we had this pending move to the new office coming up, there was a sense of excitement.
What was the original office like? The
original office, so we were just over on Montgomery, not far from here. And it was, the original office was very nondescript. It was just a floor through, rental space, cubicles with the carpet fabric walls, right. Nothing customized, very generic, little half kitchen, one conference room, and then a lot of us, everyone was just in cubes, a few offices around the ring, And I remember we were at the point where the fire marshal had come by, I guess, and told us that the current cubicle configuration was not legal because there were a couple spots where if you needed to, you couldn't get a wheelchair through in the case of an evacuation. So we were definitely at capacity. The first office was very, very nondescript and boring.
How long were you in that office for?
It was only about 3 months, I think. It was really only about 3 months or so. And then we moved to a very nice office, or at least totally redone out for us to move in. New desks, new chairs, new everything over on Spear Street. Yeah.
Was that exciting?
It was very exciting. I remember leading up, we were all poring over the seating charts and, managers were asking us well, you can't promise anything, but if where would you like to sit generally? And we were excited that there were just going to be a lot more just open space. And I ended up getting a seat right by a window. I could look out on the water on, San Francisco Bay, and I could see the bridge. I felt very, moving into that new office was great. Definitely felt like we were moving up in the world. Yeah.
Was there any upgrade in benefits in terms of snacks or anything, or was it equal in both offices?
I have to say, one of the things that they did right from the very beginning is they didn't skimp on the snacks. They were really good. I think that they took a cue from the very easy wins, and including a lot of beer. Our founders were also, it didn't hurt that our founders were good drinkers, so there was always good beer around. They were never shy about happy hour starting early on Fridays and things like that. So they kept all the good snacks. The kitchen area was great. It was nice and upgraded. Good drinks, good stuff to keep us happy. The easy stuff to keep us happy.
Right. Now, for you took this job because you thought, I just want a dependable paycheck, but now you're, at least what you described so far, the first 3 months, you enjoy the project you're working on, you're moving to this nice office, you've got coworkers you like. Were you starting to be happier that you made this decision, or were you still just hey, I'm just glad that it's a consistent paycheck?
I was feeling pretty lucky. I mean, I have to say that it seemed, kind of just looking at the landscape, I was okay, wow, we actually had, in our space, we had a pretty recognizable, game. We had a pretty hit character, and I was definitely more into that company after I got to just sort of survey it a little bit after a few months. Yeah, I would say I was more into it.
Where was, maybe in the time you're there, what was the peak number of people that worked there?
I mean, and at one point we even like a lot of tech companies, we also started having sort of a satellite set of workers in Ireland, and we had a few other sort of contract studios that we worked with. Man, I mean, maybe 150 people, definitely over 100. I mean, as I say, I remember when our co-founder lost the ability to say we reached more than 1%. I don't think we ever reached 200 people, but definitely over 100. And we had, there was even talk about maybe getting some more space. We eventually, not long before I left, so we shifted. I mean, I don't know what the structure is. We'll get to the story. Yeah. We ultimately ended up taking over another half a floor in that building. Yeah.
Okay. So as the company is growing and it's you're happy with being there, did it feel like not only is this a good place to enjoy and find work fulfilling, but did it feel like there's going to be a financial payout as tech companies often dangle in front of you?
Right. Well, I did have options, or as I and other people call them, the imaginary stock. And, this was my second startup job. And the first one that I was at, ran out of money and we all got laid off. And so that was, right out of college. I think that was a good lesson for me to learn, because again, there was definitely a point at that job. And that job was so strange, that first job, not to get too far afield, but we were an over-the-counter traded stock at that first job. And we all had our options. And there was a point at which the imaginary value of our options was, $100,000, even for us low-level employees in our 20s, fresh out of college. Now, of course, that all, vaporized and turned into nothing. So coming into the second company, I was a little wary, but we had options, and yeah, it was exciting.
So there was a mentality more if it happens, great, but I'm not really counting on it.
I was not counting on it. I looked at it as like a lottery ticket. I did, and I think that kept me sane because the sort of the paper value of the options that we had, they fluctuated. They did go up, pretty wildly, and our fortunes did kind of rise and fall. But me personally, I was not counting on or expecting a major windfall. No, it was the stability. The stability of the job was enough for me. Yeah.
Were there some of your colleagues really excited about the opportunity of potentially making it big?
I think so. I do think that there were some people there who really thought it was going to happen. Yeah, I really do, and not just the founders who maybe you want them to be optimistic, but yeah, I do think there were some people kind of not counting on it but expecting it. Yeah.
Right, and founders, obviously, they have to buy into it because otherwise you wouldn't be founding this company.
That's right.
So for how, it sounded like the first 3 months went great. How long was this honeymoon period for then?
So it did, the first thing that made me as an outsider, as I said, like as a self-professed outsider to the games world. So as I mentioned, I started there in 2008. The first iPhone hit in 2007, I think. So I really felt like, wow, we should be getting into mobile gaming.
Right.
Now, I realize in 2019 that seems like a trivially obvious thing to say, but I do remember thinking in 2008, like, wow, we had no real plans. It was kind of like, oh, well, we'll see. We're doing fine with these computer PC games. We're charging basically $20 per game. And that's fine. We don't need to get into mobile gaming. And, when I say the race to the bottom, it's a really cynical thing to say. And there is a lot of cynicism in there. It's also partly just the race to the bottom in terms of price. This was really like when mobile games first started coming out, the idea of somebody paying $20 for a non-console game, like within a couple of years, that just became laughable, So well into 2008, when it became... I don't know. I thought it was clear that the iPhone is definitely a thing, and smartphones in general are a thing. We should be getting into mobile gaming, and I noticed that it didn't seem important to. It just didn't seem as important to the people making the decisions what kind of games. And I kind of, in retrospect, I was like, that was a point at which I think I would say the company's trajectory maybe started to flatten a little bit.
So you were sort of questioning it. Were your colleagues, was it a common thing where you were all questioning it, or were you this, precog who could recognize what was going to happen in the future?
I don't want to oversell my precog abilities. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say at the time because as I said, I wasn't on the game dev side of things, and I'm sure that they felt probably more strongly about it than I did on the marketing and the site side of things. But it's hard, I think, too, when you're on your third round of funding at these companies, you have a lot of other people who you need to satisfy and a lot of other people whose decisions you need to follow. And I know sometimes it's hard to move that ship in a really agile way. But we were talking about it, definitely. There were people talking about, like, oh, maybe we should be doing this. And we did eventually, but I feel like we didn't really put our whole weight behind it, and we were a little late, and we were chasing a couple other things at the time. We eventually ended up chasing some, the Zynga style, like Farmville. Those type of games were starting to get extremely popular. Anything tied to Facebook was starting to get really popular again, into 2010 or 9, 10, whenever it was that they really took off. And I just felt like we were kind of following. I think we always had good intentions. I think everybody always had good intentions. There was nobody who was trying to, I don't know, sabotage things or push us around. It just didn't. We just weren't bold enough to be on the forefront.
Right. So the leaders were playing it safe in terms of not saying we're all in on mobile games, but look, we'll do a mobile game here or there, but not putting any kind of big bet on it.
I think so. Yeah, it was a little bit of just too much dabbling and a little too conservative, probably. Yeah, and not. Again, it's easy to say in retrospect, but not recognizing that the landscape was really radically shifting.
So as it was shifting, and I think from 2008 to 2010, that's a huge change in the way the world operated from how mobile phones were adopted. When did people start to you had your initial suspicion, oh, we should get into mobile. When did it start to become obvious, oh, this is not, we're on the wrong path?
Well, we had a really good stroke of fortune, I think, ultimately, in that we were So we were late to it, but we did get some titles out there with our major, our Mario, like if Mario is Nintendo's, we had our Mario. So we got some titles out there with our Mario, and we were doing good, and we were asked by Apple to be one of the launch titles for the iPad. So that was 2010. I remember this very clearly. And that was actually... That was huge for our company. That was really big to be invited by Apple, and I remember I was jealous of like my coworkers who were on the game dev side who got to go down and actually go to the compartmentalized room in Cupertino and touch the iPad that was chained to a desk in an air-gapped room, no photos allowed. So that was a big deal. And I do still think that was one of the best games that we made. I feel like that was one of the best, most well-realized games that we made was that iPad launch title. It just, as I say, the pricing was starting to shift. We didn't put our full weight behind it. So we were just a little bit too late and just not fully committed. We did get there and I can't say we didn't have our opportunities. We certainly had our chances, to really get behind it. But I think we were just spread too thin. We couldn't decide, did we want to make iPad games or make Facebook games or stick with our PC download model, and we tried to do all of them at the same time, and we kind of did all of them not well enough to really burst through.
So even the iPad launch didn't help you?
Well, it worked out well for us at first. It did get us a lot of publicity. It was good, but I just don't think we followed it up as strongly as we could have. We ended up getting into just kind of porting over shovelware versions of some of our other games, which just, a game industry term, slightly, not a term of praise. It's just taking something from one platform and just doing the minimal amount of work to get it to run on another platform.
Taking something that's an iPhone game, getting it on Android.
Right, or even worse, taking a PC game designed for a mouse and shoehorning it into the iPad where there's no such thing as a hover, and just not really doing the amount of work needed to make it feel like a native game. And I think we were content to do that, unfortunately.
Got it. Now, we'll get more to the demise of your SaaS graveyard, but I want to get a little bit more into your day-to-day while things were still going good. You said it wasn't crazy hours. How long would you work in a typical day?
It was a good work environment. I live in the East Bay. I would take BART across the bay. I would usually get to work by 9:30. Mm-hmm. And if I was a little bit late, that's okay. It was no big deal. And people would usually start going home around 5 or 5:30. And as I mentioned, there was ample beer and the ping pong table and a good hangout central island place. And people would kind of start congregating in the kitchen around 5 or so. We did a lot of drinking at that job.
Every day, or?
There were... Almost every day. Almost every day, you could reliably meet in the kitchen around 5:30, 6, have a beer with somebody if you wanted to before you went home. And frequently we would go out after work. We had a good core. There was a lot of camaraderie at that place, I have to say. So yeah, our day was over, unless there was a big release or a big push for something happening. Our day was 9:30 to 5:30, I would say. That was my team's general schedule. It was really very reasonable.
And then we've talked about beer and the snacks. Were there other perks along with that job?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We did not get a lot of swag, which is, again, having been around this city long enough and working for another tech company now, I look back and we were really under-swagged compared to what we could have been.
Maybe that was the demise of the company.
It was the food and the drinks, and we would have parties and stuff like that. And as I say, our founders were very convivial founders, and they would often take us out for meals or big drinks after we go to the Irish Bank. Was a very popular stop for us after work. Again, not too far from where we were recording at this very moment, and pick up the tab for everybody. It was a fun atmosphere.
Were there any events, either just like happy hours or meals, where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe the company spent this much money on this?
We took, after we moved into the new office, and after we finished the big site redesign, the one that I had, largely been hired to help lead. So, I guess that was maybe a 4 or 5 month project. So we finished that, we launched the new site. It looked good. Everyone was happy. We took like one of these bay cruises. I think the Hornblower cruises.
Right.
I think, yeah. It's not the height of luxury, but it's a nice trip. You get dinner. We had an open bar. They take you out on the San Francisco Bay, and they took out. Our entire site team, which was not just my subgroup, but there were probably 30 people that they took out there, and that was a nice little perk. They didn't have to do that. We would go to Giants games occasionally. I get a little jaded because I do have friends who work for some of these legitimately household name companies, and I hear about some of the perks that they get, and they're just way over the top. So relative to who we were at the time, that was a pretty nice perk, I have to say. That was maybe the high point of the perks, was the Bay Cruise Day to celebrate the site launch. Yeah, that was pretty nice.
And in terms of the site launch, that's a big deal. Was that your biggest accomplishment there?
I think it was. Yeah, I think without question that was probably my personal biggest accomplishment while I was there, and then maybe my team's biggest accomplishment. Yeah, and things started changing a little bit after that. Yeah, the site settled into a steady state. Hard to say. We didn't have a whole lot of major updates or redesigns to the site after that point.
So were you just had less work to do then?
No, it was just shifted onto other things. When again, for example, in 2010, when we were really focused on Facebook, there was a lot of work to be done with tying anything into Facebook, and just as one example. So there were just other things to work on, other endeavors. And as I mentioned, because we were maybe spreading ourselves a little thin, it meant that there were a lot of projects to kind of tie the marketing team into, which meant that there was always work for us to do. We were small. At our peak, we had, I think, 4 people on my team, maybe 5. And eventually my manager left, and I became the manager of my team. So that was a shift as well. That was a high point for me as well. It wasn't tied to any one project or anything, though. But that was, in terms of professional development, yeah.
Right, that's a big move, going from an individual contributor to a manager.
It was, and what made me feel good at the time was, so my manager left, and like a lot of tech companies, we need to move quickly. And my coworkers and my fellow designers and the people I worked with, they were. I was embarrassed by it. I really was legitimately embarrassed. They were very vocal in saying, we want Colin to manage the team. We don't want you to bring somebody new in. Mm-hmm. And I certainly was not lobbying for that or asking for it, but that was nice. It was very touching. So I think management, I think they were kind of, on one hand, they're like, oh, that's nice that you think that, but we might want to hire somebody. But they didn't. They gave me the job, and they trusted our team to do it. And I feel like I did a pretty good job.
So that was a good, looking back on the overall experience, you feel like that was a good thing? You got to become a manager to get that experience? Definitely.
And to have, experience hiring people to work under me, and, just being one level a little bit higher up in, a relatively, not that there were that many levels in the company to begin with, but yeah, it was good just to get a little bit greater insight into how that works in a tech company in San Francisco in 2010.
Right. Did it give you more perspective on how the company was doing?
It did in some ways, yeah. It definitely impressed on me. When we had an open position, the pressure of, we need to fill that position ASAP because we have revenue numbers to hit, we have the board breathing down our neck, we don't have the luxury of spending 60 days looking for the exact right person. Yeah, so that was just as one example. Yeah, I definitely, I think, got a little bit better sense of, we all want to hit the rocket ship launch, but some people need the rocket to launch. Yeah.
Was there more pressure on you in that role?
There was more pressure on me, just in the sense of deadlines. There was, but creatively, so much of the creative pressure was on the game side of the team. There was more pressure to figure out how to, use Facebook more efficiently, and how to get our app store listings looking better, and have our app icons more attractive. We were like a lot of companies, I think we were kind of just desperate to find, well, maybe not desperate, but we were very eager to find easy wins and, easy ways to move the needle, as the hackneyed expression goes. So there was pressure to try new things, and to execute on them quickly,
Was in the manager role, did you no longer do any design, or did you still do design as well?
I would still have to do some design, but I definitely did not have as much time to, and was definitely more into the supervisory and approval role. My team, we also managed generating the logos for all of our games. So even though most of our games, as I mentioned, were acquisitions by independent studios, we would do the repackaging, including coming up with the final name, final logo, and all that stuff. And I had some very talented artists who I worked with, and so we would handle that part of the process as well. And so kind of, part of my job took on, just art direction of things like logos and overall skins for iPad games, things like that.
And you still felt satisfied with that day-to-day work?
It was fun. It started, once it started to hit a routine, there were some parts, there were definitely some days I would come in and I would feel like, oh, it's another one of these, where we would have maybe a mediocre hit of a game, and I would see sort of us falling into the same pattern of another game that looked like kind of like that mediocre hit. And it definitely, some of the shine kind of came off, I would say, when we hit the point where not all of our games would reliably hit. Yeah, that was hard.
So let's start talking about the downturn of the SaaS graveyard. At any point were you thinking like, oh, should I be getting out of here?
I really didn't. And part of it was I was never. I mean, I've had friends who have been at companies where the paychecks just mysteriously stop coming one day, and no one really knows why. And I never had anything like that happen, so I would never was in fear of my paycheck. We had laid off some people in some areas before. I was never really in fear of that. I was probably a little complacent. I was probably happy that it was stable enough. And as I mentioned, because I wasn't looking at it as a springboard to another job in the games industry, I wasn't looking for an exit, really. In retrospect, and I don't know, you may even be getting to this, but in retrospect, I did notice that, a lot of my very talented coworkers are leaving for other companies and bigger companies, or maybe companies that have, a larger but an earlier round of funding or things like that.
Were there conversations like before they left of them saying like, I got to get out of here, like the company's going down, or was it they just left and you were a little surprised?
Maybe I just was not trusted enough, or I was too clueless. But I was surprised by most of the people leaving. I really was. Most of the people leaving caught me by surprise. But after a time, I started to be like, okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, this person wants to go work for Blizzard and work on World of Warcraft. I mean, I can't blame that person. That's a much bigger deal than here. Yeah, those kind of things. But yeah, I don't know. I probably maybe should have realized a couple that I didn't.
Was there any major leadership changes going on during this time when things started to go a little bit downhill?
Yeah, there were. Our board, I certainly wasn't in the meetings, but our founding CEO left. Let me put it that way. And it's
voluntarily, or
no, I don't think so. I think very few founding CEOs want to leave their company before it becomes a major hit. And I think that was probably hard. But I think the board and the investors really they needed a change, and we were starting to lose a lot of ground. We had to go for another round of funding, which we got, so that was either 4 or 3, depending on my memory. Again, you don't necessarily want to be in your 4th round of funding, if you don't have to. So they changed the leadership. They brought in a new CEO, and that was definitely a big change where I was starting to think, maybe for the first time, like, oh, okay, I should at least mentally prepare myself for the fact that I might just get laid off with no notice. That's a possibility now. When the founding CEO is asked to leave, yeah.
They could ask anyone.
They could ask anyone to leave. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And things definitely started to change then. And we did make some more bold moves at that point, but I think it may have been a little bit too late.
Did the culture change as well with the news?
The culture did change. Yeah, the culture changed. I felt that we started to get, whatever groups you were sort of in before, you kind of ended up sort of solidified in those groups. Like we had a major new hiring wave to really support our major new endeavor. We were really trying to get into Facebook games, and so they hired, I mean, they probably hired at least 20 or 30 people just for that endeavor alone. But those people really, it was almost like, they were almost, they were all great people, and we were all friends with all of them, but there was definitely a sense that they were like the phase 2.0 of the company, and everybody who was there before was the phase 1.0. Not like they were privileged or we were privileged, but just that it was different. Yeah, different flavors of the company.
You were on the wrong side of the tracks, or they were on the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah. So yeah, it was the culture changed. It did, and I noticed that that team definitely worked longer hours. That team worked hours a lot more in line with some of the more big name game companies of that time. And certainly from what I heard, sort of through the industry. We were starting to, in a bad way, starting to catch up with some of the longer hours and more crunch time projects. There was definitely more crunch time at our company.
And so that was hitting you as well, longer hours?
A little bit, just in the sense that, being on the marketing side, we had to be more reactive, and sometimes we had to get something together on a very short time scale. Yeah.
So as... you mentioned your first thought, like, oh, this could happen to me. I could potentially be laid off. Were you thinking of leaving on your own, or?
So I have to say that with the change in being made a manager, and then maybe 1 year after that, or not even that long. The time scale is hard to remember. 8 months, 9 months after that. When it was starting to become clear, I think, that there were a lot of talented people leaving the company. And it was a chore to replace people in the middle of, it's hard to fix the plane while you're flying. And they gave a bunch of people some raises, and they gave me a raise. I think, they were pretty upfront about it. I think they wanted to prevent me starting to look around and be like, forget this, I'm out of here. And I was happy to take the nice increase in salary. I decided they're gonna have to lay me off. Like I remember when I got that not insubstantial raise, I remember thinking to myself, they're gonna have to lay me off. I'm not leaving. Yeah.
Just because, like, did you expect a package, or just because, like, oh, this salary is good, I'm just going to milk it for every drop I can get?
More the latter. I was not expecting a package. I mean, I understand, where it's, everything is at will. I know that anything they gave me was just going to be out of the goodness of their heart. They weren't obligated to give me anything. So I wasn't counting on it. But I was happy to write it out. And
did you ever have to lay anyone off?
No, luckily I didn't. Luckily I never personally had to lay anybody off. My team was always very lean. I did in the course that I was there, I saw everyone that I started with by the time I left was gone. So when I started there, I was hired into a team of 3 designers and 1 manager. My manager left. One of the other designers left. The other designer left. And then I had hired some people in. So basically, I saw my entire team, including my immediate manager, had turned over by the time I left. Yeah.
But not you. You didn't have to do any of it.
I didn't have to do any of it. They all left of their own accord. Yeah, luckily, in retrospect.
So I feel like we should go now to you finally being shown the door or getting laid off. Like, how were you starting to suspect this is coming, or?
I was. So we when we really shifted gears, trying to just really have a big hit with the Facebook game, and it was starting to become clear we were just we were behind schedule. I just don't think we had the traction there. We had a lot of good people working hard. We had just too much ground to make up and too short of a time to get there. And I saw people, we started having some layoffs. And I remember kind of mentally preparing myself for it, but I was still surprised when it happened. And again, I've learned enough about the industry and just, companies in general to realize, like, if you're going to have a mass layoff, you do it at the end of December. You do it before the new year starts, and you have to get, all the benefits packages, and you got to,
And also you have like a clean start of the year.
Yeah. So there was a pretty substantial wave of layoffs that I was part of, and I was a little surprised when I showed up to work on whatever day it was, and they're like, "Oh, hey, can we just kind of pop in a meeting room real quick, Colin?" And I was like, "Uh-oh."
Was that your manager asking, or?
It was my immediate manager at the time, who was sort of a quasi-manager because our in-between manager had left for another job at that point. Like, people were starting to leave, and I think that the company wisely recognized, rather than drip, 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 let's just really cut lean here. I should also mention that at this point we had now brought in a third CEO. So the second CEO that we had brought in had also, left, been asked to leave, shifted direction.
How long have they lasted?
Maybe a year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe a year at that point. And so there was a pretty big wave of layoffs there at the end, in that last December. And I was a little surprised at first, but it made sense. And then I came back to my desk and saw everybody else who was packing up all their stuff, and it really cut across the entire company. I mean, I saw people from every department really kind of being, that was their last day, basically, yeah.
Did you get any package?
We did. They gave us a very nice package. It was, I think, a month salary, which was pretty good. I was happy with that. Maybe even a little bit more. And of course, we'll give you a nice letter. We'll vouch for you. That, we're not going to mess with your unemployment. Anything like that. They were as cool as they could be. I think all factors taken into consideration. Yeah, they did not have to give us a month salary, maybe even a little bit more, but it was good. It was okay. We all went out drinking at the bar across the street, and that was the end of that workday, yeah.
So it happened at the start of the day or the end of the day?
It was the start of the day.
And did you start drinking immediately after, or do you have to stay through the day?
Oh, no. I mean, at any tech company, these days, there's so many other contingent things. Like when you lay somebody off, you've got to close down their email account, you've got to shut down their access to the shared server, and you've got to do all these other things that make your job virtually impossible at a digital company. So, without access to my email or the shared drive, my day was over. Yeah, we started drinking, I think, at 11:30. Yeah, and well until the evening.
Cool. So now looking back, how do you feel about the experience? Are you glad that you stayed there as long as you did?
I am glad I stayed there as long as I did, because it did give me a good chunk of time. I did learn a lot while I was there. My career to date has been sort of punctuated by startups and then 6 or 7 years of doing contracting, freelancing, kind of alternating in that rhythm. So it felt like it was about right. It had been 3 years. I was trying to be philosophical about it. I think it was good. I'm glad that I made them lay me off. Let me put it that. I don't wish I had left earlier. I was happy to take the increase in salary. I wish I had been there a little bit longer to get a little bit more money.
And you went into freelance after that?
I did. I went back into freelance and contract work for about another 7 years after that. Yeah.
You just didn't want the steady paycheck at that point, or?
I was determined to see if I could go back to a higher level of the work I was doing before, and I was able to go back and charge more for the work I did and be a little choosier with the work I took on. And I was lucky enough that through my job there, I was lucky to have a couple connections I made for some good clients afterwards. So I can't say it didn't work out. Yeah, if I hadn't been at the company, I wouldn't have been able to then follow up afterwards. So it worked out. All things considered, it worked out pretty well. And the company, they got sold or they got bought. They cut to the bone. I think they brought in the second CEO. Their goal was to turn the company around. And when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, when the third CEO came in, I think, this is my speculation based on being there and talking to people since then, I think the goal was to find the best possible exit for everybody who has a financial stake in this concern. And they did. I mean, they laid off a lot of people. They closed down, I think, the projects that were not really showing fruit, and they tried to find a seller, and they did. They sold the company for, several million. I'm sure less than what their original goal was back in the high-flying days, but the company still exists. It's a name. I mean, at this point, it was bought by a larger company in that game world. But there are people who I worked with who are still there, not many. But yeah, it's, like a lot of these companies, the value is the IP, is the intellectual property. And we were at that point where I really think the only reason, well, I shouldn't say that. I really think a major reason that the company wasn't just totally shut and closed was because we had a lot of valuable IP and games that would make money for somebody.
And when you left, did you have options that you could have exercised?
I did have options that I could have exercised, but I was like, man, no way. Like having been through a startup that went down with literally nothing to show once, and seeing where this company was, even though, on the day I was laid off, I didn't know that there was a sale, coming sometime soon after that. But I was not about to write a check for $10,000 to the company to buy this imaginary stock that I still wasn't even fully vested in. No, there was no way I was going to do that. And in retrospect, I made the right decision. It would not have made me any money.
So even though it sold, your shares would have been underwater.
Yes, that's right. And I do feel bad. I did have some colleagues who left and did buy out their options that became worthless, essentially. They happen to be people who went on to very high-paying jobs, so they're okay. I'm not crying for them. But no, I did not buy my options, yeah, and I'm glad I did not.
You still keep in contact with people that you knew from that
I do, yeah. Some of them, as I say, are my closest friends. Yeah, I do. Yeah. It was good. It was a very unusual bringing together of people. And I think that a lot of my colleagues there, we all said that at one point or another, is like, wow, it really, for whatever the faults the company at large had, they had a lot of really good, cool, hardworking, smart people there. And we made a lot of good friends there, yeah.
Has your experience there colored like how you act at your current job?
It definitely has made me more cynical, yeah, which maybe is a good thing, I guess. I again, at my current company, which I'm very happy at, I've not been there very long, but they are making money, they're profitable, which is a good thing to say, but I still, I think my day-to-day salary is a given, and I take that more than the options I have. I look at it again, it's the startup lottery ticket, right? And if it pays off, great, wonderful. And if it doesn't, okay. Yeah.
Right, you weren't counting on it. You can still feed your family.
That's how I'm looking at it, yeah. And I'm definitely, yeah.
Cool. You have any more, or?
No, I think that wraps up. Colin, thank you so much for your time.
I'm happy to come join you guys. It's great to kind of stroll down the lane here. My old office was actually just a block and a half from where we're recording. I walked by on the way over here just to kind of try and get in the right headspace.
Steven, what was your big takeaway from today?
I love the mentality of I was going to work there until they laid me off. No reason to get worked up over things. Double leadership changes, competitors undercutting you, poor business strategy could be an emotional roller coaster. Instead, Colin understood that a job is a financial transaction. He was making more than he ever had, and he was going to milk it for every last drop.
And to top it off, he still got a little severance at the end.
That's right. We've now had 2 straight shows where employees at a SaaS graveyard found a way to benefit despite what was going on at the company. Colin financially and Jess, in the last episode, gained good professional experience. Jake, what struck you?
Yeah, both of our guests have an overall positive view of their time at a SaaS graveyard. In addition to financial or professional gains, both mentioned how they have friends from these companies years after leaving. They look back at their time at the SaaS graveyard positively, in part because of the personal connections. Which is interesting, because when you interview at a company, you can't know who you'll enjoy hanging out with. The people you wind up hanging out with probably weren't even on your interview loop, and yet your lasting impression of the company is based on those friendships.
I agree. That's a great takeaway. Well, thanks for joining us today, and stay tuned for our next episode.